So the story we spoke about last week was the verdict in the Bloody Sunday trial, and how the families really had reacted to that. The story that's taken over in the news this week is the amount of money that has been paid out to Soldier F's defence team, his legal team, because it's absolutely flabbergasting.
It is 4.3 million, and that is not the final bill. The final bills, given the fact that this was asked by the Foyle MP Colum Eastwood in the middle of October, the final bill they have acknowledged, while it won't rise a lot more, it could possibly rise to 4.5 million once they get the final bills from the defence in. So yeah, I mean, court cases can cost a lot of money, and that isn't the cost of this court case. That is the cost of the defence, not of the entire case.
So how the hell do you calculate this? We spoke to Colum Eastwood earlier in the day, and further kind of queries for breakdowns of this money is in. But, you know, how do you come up with that kind of a bill? I mean, what are you talking about? Is this, can we work out how much per day his legal team are being paid, or does this cover other things, like, for example, his accommodation, his transport to Northern Ireland for the trial, etc.?
Yeah, so it covers what they paid to defend him, and that included that. Now, they do talk about pastoral care and all sorts of other things, and it's slightly more vague as to what they actually mean by that, and that other support that he was given that couldn't be added up or quantified. But that was for his legal defence. Now, why was that so high? So this was a private defence. So, and that sounds bizarre saying that because the money came out of the public purse. But Soldier F, as someone who was facing 2 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder, would have been more than likely, like 99% sure, would have been entitled to legal aid to defend himself, and everyone is entitled to a fair defence. You know, the last thing we ever want to do is go to the American system of, you know, public defenders and the rich can buy, you know, their way out of cases by hiring highly qualified legal representation where the poor can't afford it. They're given a public defender, and the prisons in America are grown and full of people who have been jailed for miscarriages of justice. No one wants that. That's not what we're saying. Instead of having the legal aid paid for defence, Soldier F had his defence paid for by the Ministry of Defence, who hired then privately, albeit, I know this sounds silly because it's all coming out of the taxpayers' money in the public purse, but albeit that they then paid for very, very expensive legal representation. He had 2 law firms working for him. He had a very highly respected and team of lawyers working for him in England, and they were the same team of lawyers who would have been with those parachute regiment soldiers during the Savile inquiry. And then he had another highly respected legal firm based in Northern Ireland who were also working for him. So you're paying 2 law firms, and that's the start. In a lot of the cases, he would have had 2 senior KCs, as they're now called, would have been at one stage QCs. And that would not have been what you would have got from legal aid. So if you were legal aided and you were accused of such serious offences as murder, the judge would more than likely approve, and the legal aid agency would approve you to have a senior barrister, a junior barrister, and a solicitor working on your defence case. In this case, in a lot of cases, he had 2 firms of solicitors, he had 2 senior barristers. They're billing by the hour, they're billing by the day, they're not cheap people to pay. If anyone has ever had to pay a barrister for anything, you'll know they don't come cheap. And all of that clocked up. In this case, obviously went back for quite some considerable time. There were 3 judicial reviews, albeit that Soldier F was represented in those views. His barristers weren't particularly doing an awful lot because it was the family taking judicial reviews against the state. One was in relation to the anonymity order, and then another was when the PPS decided to drop the charge. They took a judicial review, they won that, and then the PPS then had to look at it again, and the charges were reinstated. Soldier F would have been represented there, albeit they weren't the main party, so they were just an interested party. The London legal team, as they said, that when in response to the question that Colum Eastwood asked, they said that the London legal team had been with them throughout, that they were committed to representing any veterans who were charged with anything. And then they also paid for his accommodation, his travel. They said they paid for something called pastoral care. We're not exactly sure what that means. And that
has to be some sort of counselling, yeah? pastoral
assume
care?
so.
Are you
I assume so.
religious or your spiritual care or something like that?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. So they haven't been clear what they mean by that. It could mean a load of different things. So travel and accommodation would not fall under the current legal aid arrangements. If a defendant in a murder case was to indicate to the judge that they weren't able to afford to travel back and forward to a trial every day off their own steam while on bail, well, then it is the job of the state to make sure that that defendant is sitting in the dock every day of that trial, and therefore your bail would just be revoked. I was writing about this again this week, and I did ask, a few people what would happen, and they, as one senior legal representative said, you would be transported to custody, but your new bail address would be McGabry Prison. They would basically revoke your bail. I went, well, if you can't abide by your bail conditions and show up in court every day, we're revoking your bail. So his transport and everything was paid for by the MOD. And a lot of people would say, well, why shouldn't the MOD pay for it? It was them that sent him here. It was them that sent him out on bloody Sunday. But the strange thing, I suppose, about this is that, well, there's a number of things. First of all, he would have been entitled to legal aid. He would have been representative. They could have supported him. They could have done the pastoral care, but they didn't. They threw the most expensive defence that they could think of at him to protect him. But he was being prosecuted by the British state. Let's face it, the Public Prosecution Service is the state. So he was being prosecuted by the state while another arm of the state was doing everything to make sure that that arm of the state didn't get a successful prosecution. It's very complicated in that respect there. And then I suppose you look at the circumstances that the prosecution came around. And I don't want to repeat, and I'm sure Colum Eastwood's probably said the same thing, so I don't want to be repetitive. But Soldier F, along with Soldier H and Soldier J and the other soldiers who were told by the Savile inquiry, the Bloody Sunday inquiry, that if they were truthful and if they give truthful statements, well, then they could not be prosecuted or incriminate themselves for anything they said. You could have confessed to all 13 murders if you had done them and you were telling the truth, and you couldn't be prosecuted. Savile then said that they had not been truthful, that they had not. And the judge then is summing up, and the judgment is online if anyone wants to go and read that very lengthy judgment, which took 2 hours to deliver. The judgment of Judge Patrick Lynch also says they were not being truthful, that the statements were changed, and they were changed to back up each other's stories. And that's why they couldn't be relied on in the criminal court. And that's why Savile then found that they had lied to the Savile inquiry. Had Soldier F told the truth, then there wouldn't be a prosecution, or there wouldn't have been grounds for a prosecution.
And I suppose digging down into that a little bit over the years, and those statements that were given in the beginning and the later ones at Widgery and then at Savile, was there ever discovery that there was directions to lie from superior officers at that point? Or were these guys, Soldier F, etc., going out lying and covering for one another on their own basis?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that the judge in this trial, not if we don't go back to Savile, back to this trial, one of the things the judge says that they were lying in was that they claimed that they were acting in self-defense. And you have a justification. If you're a soldier and you're put into what is a conflict or a dangerous situation, you have a defense of, my life was at risk, it was me or him, I had to defend myself, or my fellow soldiers' lives were at risk and I was defending them. So in the statements, especially when you come around what was said about what happened in Glenfadda Park North, when they start making those statements to the Royal Military Police, they make a statement and they go in and they come back and then they make a different statement. But all of the statements say that all of those who lost their lives, I seen a man with a nail bomb, he threw it didn't explode. I seen a man with a short arm rifle, he threw it, he pointed in my direction. There is a lot of, justification for how that came about. Savile obviously exonerated all the victims, said none of this had happened, that they were all innocent. Judge Patrick Lynch was scathing. He says these people were shot in the back, many of them, while they were running away, and those responsible should hang their heads in shame. But the inference is that they were allowed to go away, confer, get their stories together, and then come back and make a different statement. And that was always what the problem was. And that is why what was so problematic in getting a conviction, because how can you rely on those statements? How do you know which parts are true and which parts are lies? What the prosecution service had hoped was that the civilian witnesses would corroborate the bits of it which they said were true, that they had shot these people, and then you have to take away the fact that they didn't shoot people because they thought they were in fear of their life, because many of them were shot in the back. But yeah, I mean, it's. I suppose that's where we're getting off on the stuff that we talked about last week. But the defence of that, I think it shows the importance that the British state, the Ministry of Defence, and two different administrations. Remember, this all started under a Conservative government and it ends under a Labour government. The two different administrations both took the decision to decide that they would dedicate huge vast sums of public money to this one man to make sure that he wasn't prosecuted, because for him to be prosecuted, I suppose, is unthinkable in terms of the reputation of the British Army and what they did when they were stationed here in Northern Ireland. But I mean, it's eye-watering. I've heard, sometimes we'll FOI, how much did that trial cost? And you'll get the prosecution cost for the entire trial. Now, bear in mind, that does not include this. There's other numbers with many zeros and after them to go as well that this case cost. But the public interest was, the test for prosecution was met. And in fact, twice during the trial, the defence tried to have it stopped and said, look, this trial should be stopped. And the judge went away and said, no, I've looked at it. And I think there's enough evidence that if there was a jury, we would continue on with this. So there was justification for the prosecution, without a doubt. It was tested, it met the test. The judge agreed that it met the test on two occasions during the trial. It wasn't enough evidence to get a conviction, and I think that most legal minds would look through that and say, well, you couldn't rely on them because they were liars, basically, because the soldiers told so many lies. How do you know which part's true and which part isn't? And the test for prosecution in a criminal court, just to remind everyone, it has to be beyond reasonable doubt. And that's where it fell down. But at the same time, I mean, no matter what the evidence was, when you think about this, you're bringing in people who command vast sums of money for their work because they're considered the best at that job, So they had made sure that he had the best defence that our money could buy, basically.
And I suppose kind of like, because usually, these cases are tried, okay, under the public purse, but in free legal aid, that maybe these private, when you're offering these services privately, you're probably not scrutinised as much. So this is a particular case that it's public money, even though it's private defending. So it'll be interesting to see that breakdown about how much everything costs. And you talk about the hourly rate, there's so many boxes and so much information in this case to pour over it would indeed take such a long time. I suppose the stark contrast here is, and maybe you can tell us something about what blew up on social media, but the stark contrast is the families, the Bloody Sunday families, who travelled, many of them pensioners, and travelled to Belfast every day for this trial to be there. Sometimes they came on a bus hired from Derry. Sometimes they came on the train and spent their money, they're on their pensions, whatever they have. I thought what was quite a nice little part of it, but was never really publicised, was that these people were fed by community groups in the markets area of Belfast every day, who sort of reached out to them in support of them and brought them over for a bit of lunch during the day, etc. It'd be a long day in court, it is, and it's a long drive up from Belfast or from Derry. So the contrast there between what support did they have, what money did they have, compared to all that money that was pumped into Soldier F's defence.
Yeah, and look, I'm not blaming, because the public, unless you've actually had to be in a court or work in a court or be a defendant in a court or be a witness in a court, you don't really need to. Most people don't know what goes on inside courts, and so they just automatically assumed that the Bloody Sunday families also had a defence during that trial, and they did not. If you are given evidence in a criminal court, if you are the victim of a crime, if you are the relative of a victim, if you're a witness to a crime, that's all you are. You're a witness for the state. Therefore, you are not represented. Your solicitor does not have a seat on the benches in the court because you are not represented. You are there as a witness for the state to give evidence. So there is a lot of people on social media. Look, and I know, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, is the real world. It is full of just very angry people, just being very angry all the time and saying, well, why you didn't tell us how much their solicitors were paid. They weren't paid anything because they weren't working. They were there, but they were there sitting with families who they've known throughout, 20 odd year campaign. They weren't paid because why would they be paid? Because the people who were there were there as witnesses for the prosecution. They weren't there independently represented. So the answer to that question is easily answered. It was zero, because they were witnesses. They weren't participating in any other way in that trial.
But the solicitors were there with the families, Madden and Finucane, represent them and
They
gave statements on their
were.
behalf and etc. But and they were sort of, I suppose, they were getting this kickback on social media. Well, how much were you earning, kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you expect everyone to have to earn a living, but for that work, I mean, it's my understanding, and someone's correct me they can, that they were there pro bono as people who they have got to know those families over a very long period of time and have become more, I suppose, than legal representatives and become friends with them, and felt, especially as a number of them are very elderly, they'd be in their late 70s or 80s, that they were there to support them. And also, if you don't understand what's going on in a criminal trial, if you have someone to say, look, the reason they're doing this is because of X, Y, or Z, but like, you can't get legal aid for that. You know, you don't get paid for that. There's things that there would have been legal aid for, but only, I think, in one of those 3 judicial reviews, and that would have been the legal aid. If you get legal aid for any sort of case, it's and rightly so, it's very heavily scrutinised in terms of what you can and can't claim for, and how many hours you can and can't claim for, because it's public money, and so they have to account for every penny of it, and that's as it should be.
Have you any idea what the kind of the annual legal aid bill is, say, for example, in Northern Ireland?
It is absolutely extortionate as it is, but let me say, I just actually find it. I did write something about this not so long ago. And remember, by the way, when they're paying legal aid, the legal aid...
when you say it's a lot, is it anywhere near the 4.3 million that has gone into this case?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, way more than that. For 2024, the annual legal aid bill for Northern Ireland is about 120 million.
Okay.
And remember, that is for every single, you go and sit in a magistrate's court and there's 30, 40, 50, 60 people on the list. Almost every one of them will have legal aid. It will be pennies, like you don't get paid an awful lot for it. That's why you see a lot of junior solicitors working in the magistrate's court, bail hearings, everything else. And then also you have to move into other cases where legal aid is applied to as well, that aren't criminal cases as well. There's civil cases and all of that. So the legal aid bill, I would hate to see what it is in the UK. I'm sure it's massive.
I'm sure it's enormous.
But that is for tens of thousands of people, and 4.3 million is for one person. So
to try and dig further into this 4.3 million figure, you really need to be looking at the hourly rate, don't you? You need to take the free legal aid bill, have a look at that. Is there any sort of breakdown on that, what the hourly rate is for etc.?
I am not sure. I mean, I know that obviously Colum Eastwood asked this as a parliamentary question. That's why I got it so quickly. And I will say, as journalists, had we asked that question, I would still be asking that in a year and a half from now. They would come up with every excuse in the book not to give me that. The thing is, when you do those parliamentary questions, when MPs do that, it is the quickest way to get information, and always has been. It's quick and it's efficient. And also, government departments will always just be completely nutty. They will have to put out what exactly the question asked and the answer to it, because it's part of the record of Parliament. So it can't be inaccurate, it can't be a lie, it can't be misleading. It has to be what it is. So had it not been for that, I don't know when would have got this information. Will it be able to drill down as to which firm was paid what, which person was paid what, how much they earned from that? I think potentially Colum Eastwood could go back and ask further questions and ask for that to be drilled down. But what we do know is that, these are people who were at the top of their game, and as so would be commanding,
the highest figures you can imagine.
They're not people who would be, junior barristers on the lower end of the scale, and even the quite junior sort of barristers in them, a lot of them came from England, with people who would be well paid. But people get paid what they're worth. You know what I mean? It's just the thing was when was the decision made to have so many of them? I mean, I've been told that when Soldier F was first questioned in relation to these murders, and at that time it was multiple murders, more than 2, that he came along with 2 solicitors, and that is unheard of. You show up by arrangement to be interviewed for something, and you show up with your solicitor in tow. I've never heard of anyone showing up with 2 solicitors in tow.
It's a funny thing, because I think had this happened here, where you have a government call out where you if where the taxpayer can identify exactly the money is coming out of their pocket to pay for this, it would be probably heads would roll politically. But in the north, it's slightly different because you're looking at this money came from the taxpayer, both in the north of Ireland plus in the UK. So it feels as if it's spread a bit, does it?
Yeah, well, one of the barristers in the defence is Mark Mulholland, KC, who's a very experienced barrister. And Mark Mulholland, I'm sure you earned every penny. Please don't come for me. I haven't got the money to be arguing with you. So I say you earned every bean that you got paid. But Mark Mulholland, just for reference, Mark Mulholland represented Conor McGregor as well. So this is someone who people come looking for, in terms of representation. So, and I mean, if anyone wants to, Google Mark Mulholland Casey, you can see the list of very high profile cases he's represented people in.
I'm sort of talking more from the kind of the how the story and how this figure has gone down on the ground in Northern Ireland with the general population.
You can horror. But you can imagine this place, as much as we try to say it's 2025 and we're so far into the peace process, everything falls down a line down the middle. So for most nationalists, for the people of Derry especially, they are horrified. They're like, is this what the state was prepared to pay for a man who admitted in statements that he shot dead people, innocent people, who the Savile inquiry found were innocent, who the judge in this case said were innocent, unarmed people? Is this what they're willing to do just to stop people, to prevent justice being served? And then in other cases, you will have many from the sort of unionist community will go, well, good, he was an innocent man, so they should be paying for them. Our boys were sent here, they should get all the defence that they deserve. And then I'll go, well, how much did the bloody Sunday tribunal cost? How much did the bloody Sunday inquiry cost? And the bloody Sunday inquiry only took place because the families couldn't get answers any other way. The state could save themselves millions if they would just give people the answers that they ask for and not continually fight them and have to have people on both sides. And, we see families who've been murdered by the IRA, families who've been murdered by lawless paramilitaries, families who were murdered by the state, all having to go to the courts and try and get information and disclosure for inquests and civil case and everything because the state holds onto that information and won't give it. So I suppose the answer to that is, did the bloody Sunday inquiry cost a lot of money? My God, yes, it did. Inquiries do cost a lot of money. Did the bloody Sunday inquiry need to happen? No. Had back then, had the government told the truth, had they told the truth in the multiple opportunities they had after that, well, then there would have been no need for that amount of money to have been spent. But yeah, I mean, as you said, mixed reactions. A lot of unionists welcomed the fact that he was found not guilty, and a lot of them would have no hesitation in saying that was 4.3 million well spent. And a lot of nationalists are saying this is an extortionate amount of public money. And it just does seem strange to me because, as I said, not to repeat myself, the state prosecuted him, but the state defended him.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's the odd sort of paradox here.
Only in Northern Ireland. I think actually the takeaway thing for you and I is that we are definitely in the wrong jobs.
Listen, okay. Well, no, I think I've told you before, never mind the law and all that, going to university and getting yourself in debt, carry on. It's a trade. I'm coming back as a plumber. I am trying to get a plaster to plaster my dining room. And first of all, trying to get one, they're that busy. And second of all, trying to pay them, you need to be selling unused organs to get them people. We're coming back in the next life as trades. You and I, you could be a plumber,
okay.
I'll be an electrician, we'll be loaded.
Okay. So that's one big shout out for a plasterer, is it you're looking for today?
A bloody plasterer.
We need a bloody plasterer in Belfast, please. And all information from crimeworld.com. All right, thanks, Allison. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.